Nutrition. It is a characteristic which is very essential to the existence of life. Whether we talk about plants, animals, humans, nutrition is paramount to one's existence. When we talk about development, economies, governance, and the food patterns across the world, nutrition is one of those important elements which comes into mind for successful growth of not just human beings as species, but also the societies which they form a part of. Hello everyone, my name is Abhishiekh Saxena and I am a faculty at GS Core. So in today's special report session, we will discuss the Global Nutrition Report. So the edition which we'll be talking about as part of this session was released in the year 2021. The significance of Global Nutrition Report is in its empirical approach. It is a data-driven scientific appraisal of the status of nutrition across countries. At the same time, while the report talks about the hits and misses in the overall nutrition landscape of the country, the progress which the country is making in this particular dimension, and what are the challenges which lay in front of these countries in terms of improving their performance on nutrition. So the report itself, as I said, is an empirical appreciation. So it is giving a holistic idea about where the interventions need to be made. It gives us certain pointers, certain indicators on which the policymakers, the governments have to work. So let us get into the details of what this report is all about. The aim. Basically, the report acts as a pointer to governments, civil society, other stakeholders, whether we are talking about private individuals, corporates, NGOs, and other parastatal bodies. It acts as a pointer to them to give a reality check on the status of nutrition in a particular geography. Okay? Basically, the idea behind this particular report is to strike malnutrition at its very core. As you are aware that malnutrition is a problem which a lot of countries face, especially the countries of the global south who are underdeveloped and in the developing phases, where disparities are stark. The society is fragmented into haves and have-nots. So this malnutrition, based on which the potential of the society to grow, rest, gets heavily influenced by such reports, or the policy rather to correct the anomalies in the nutrition paradigm gets heavily influenced by such reports. Okay, so the idea here is to end malnutrition in all forms. We'll talk about those forms as we move forward. Okay? So that is the larger aim. That means it is not just about the children we are talking. We are talking about malnutrition among teens. We are talking about malnutrition among women, especially the women in the age group in which they are more likely to bear children. So the idea is to holistically strike malnutrition as a malaise and improve the scenario. Okay. Then the goal. The goal is to inform, shape, and inspire. Who? Not just the governments, but across the board, all the stakeholders who are relevant in the overall nutrition landscape of a particular country and the world. Okay, it talks about the data which can be a useful input in framing the policy. It talks about the practice and innovative financing which can be incorporated to improve upon the current scenario. Okay, so this 2021 Global Nutrition Report basically is a fact-based, concise, data-focused approach to map the diets and nutrition patterns around the world. Okay, the report also talks about the uncertainty or the unsustainability of status quo, that we cannot let the business run as usual. We will have to make certain disruptive interventions to improve the current scenario. And at the current rate, we cannot end the malaise of malnutrition. Okay? At the same time, it maps the poor dietary patterns leading to malnutrition. The poor dietary patterns leading to malnutrition. Okay, so that is the overarching approach of the Global Nutrition Report in terms of its aim, goal, and features. Now let us analyze this report in a bit detail, especially in the context of the prevailing global scenario. As you are aware that COVID-19 pandemic has barely left any aspect of our society untouched. Whether we talk about development, economics, politics, geopolitics, everything is getting reshaped under the shadow of COVID-19 pandemic. The supply chain disruptions, the job losses, the economic slowdown induced due to COVID has had a severe impact on the economic patterns, and that impact on economic patterns has led to impact on the food and the dietary patterns of individuals across the globe. Hence, the nutrition aspect has also not remained untouched from the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, at the same time, the correlation between things like metabolic health, obesity, okay, diabetes, etc., have highlighted how the resource distribution in terms of the availability of food and the nutrients is very skewed, how some territories have been more affected by COVID due to lack of a sustainable dietary patterns. Okay, the investment in terms of the economic growth have been aplenty. However, not adequate focus has been paid on the nutrient quotient of the overall investment scenario. At the same time, while there are multiple food support programs across the globe, including the ones like PDS running in India, midday meals, etc. The focus on nutrition aspect is a bit diluted and it does not acquire a center stage on the discourse about ending malnutrition. Okay? While the financing in the post-pandemic world is largely based on the philosophy of build back better. Build back better. And the economics have largely remained the focus of this particular thinking. Not adequate emphasis is getting paid on the nutritional aspect of the building back. Okay? Hence, not just the economic focus, but the loss which the world faced during the 2 years of pandemic and the world which continue to face this because of the isolated spots where pandemic is still ranging. Therefore, this build back better philosophy needs to incorporate better financing, better targeting, better focused approach with nutrition at the core to resolve the crisis not just economically but in the long-term health of the world, but in the interest of the long-term health of the world. Now, let us look at the global nutrition targets. So, in the year 2013, there was 2012, I beg your pardon, World Health Assembly, which is under the aegis of the WHO, that is the World Health Organization. The Assembly endorsed a resolution called 65.6, and as part of the resolution, it endorsed a comprehensive implementation plan on maternal, infant, young, maternal, infant, young, child nutrition, denoted by an acronym MIYCN. So, the 2012 World Health Assembly under the resolution 65.6 talked about a comprehensive action on malnutrition and not just about children. It talked about maternal health as well, just like I said in the introduction, on all forms of malnutrition. Okay? And it determined 6 targets to be met by the year 2025. Those targets were 40% reduction, 40% reduction in under 5 year stunting, right? Under 5 years stunting, 50% reduction of anemia for women who are in the reproductive age bracket. Okay? 30% reduction in low birth weight. So, a lot of you might be aware or might have heard stories or read case studies wherein though children are born, they come to this world, but they are underweight. That is primarily because of the lack of nutrition to the mother which gave birth to them. So, the target is to reduce it by 30%. Okay? At the same time, while underweight is a concern, so is obesity and being overweight. So, the target is also to ensure that the overweight does not rise. Okay. While a lot of children do come into this world, but the breastfeeding rates remains abysmal. And the breastfeeding is the key for a newborn child and his or her nutrition. So the target is to increase the exclusive breastfeeding for first 6 months by 50%. By 50%. While all of this is largely focused on the maternal and infant, there is one important thing which remains to be addressed, that is amongst the young, that is the phenomena of wasting. So the target determined by the World Health Assembly was to keep the wasting under check by keeping it under 5%. Okay. So when we talk about nutrition, while the empirical realities might be about the nutrient values and the numbers, the resultants reflect on all these parameters. While the report is published by a collective initiative of multiple stakeholders, the report keeps into mind the larger philosophy set up by the World Health Assembly in the year 2012. At the same time, it acts as a validation exercise on how the world is progressing on those targets. Now, while we have talked about the targets, the approach, the MIYCN aspect of holistic nutrition and reduction of malnutrition in all forms, that is for maternal, infant and young, let us look at how India fares in this whole scenario. So recently, if you have observed, National Family Health Survey 5 was released, and as an exercise, National Family Health Survey 5 revealed certain information which can be very useful in tweaking the policy going ahead. At the same time, it serves as a wake-up call to take action on certain aspects. While the National Family Health Survey 5 reveals that no significant improvement has happened on the front of health and nutritional status. Considering the size of India and considering the number of government initiatives in this particular ecosystem, it is a startling wake-up call. The latest data suggests that 7.7% children are severely wasted, while 19.3% are wasted and 35.5% are stunted. So you can imagine the gloomy picture which is there. If we calculate this, so it boils down to more than 50%, right? This is what? 27 and 35.5 will boil down to almost 62%. So almost 2/3 of the population is reeling under wasting and malnutrition. So while conventional discourse remain on policy, e-governance, economics, trade, this aspect gets subdued. However, it is very, very significant as the statistics show. Okay. At the same time, 3.4% children are overweight. are overweight. And this figure has risen sharply in the sense that National Family Health Survey 4 had this figure at 2.1%. So while the malnutrition is a concern, so is the rising number of overweights in the country. Okay. Some set of more findings. Anemia among children under 5 has become significantly worse, with the current prevalence at 67.1%. Okay. And 57% of women in the reproductive age remain anemic. So a lot needs to be done in terms of provision for malnutrition, hunger, stunting, wasting, etc. While we discuss this report, a lot of you might be thinking that why are we discussing this report at all as students, as academics? See, this report, as I said, is not just for the governments, it's for all the stakeholders. It's for NGOs, it's for policymakers, it's for government, politicians, and it is for us as scholars, as students, to quote this data and to build the argument in favor or in against of a certain action. At the same time, this data-backed approach will provide certain weight to our arguments and will make them more meaningful. Now, let us look at more when it comes to how India is faring towards the global nutrition targets. So, as you can see in this graphic, while childhood stunting is on course, like we are on course to achieve in terms of childhood stunting, we haven't made greater strides in terms of anemia, childhood wasting. Okay, they are worsening rather. Okay, while overweight is largely on check, exclusive breastfeeding is on check, rest of the other targets are off track. In the sense, the sodium intake in women and men, low birth weight, raised blood pressure among men and women, obesity, diabetes, all these things are increasingly rising in our society. And while these things are rising in our society, they will have a bearing on the already stretched health infrastructure and system of our country. So that is something to take a note of when we will talk about health in a particular question or while discussing a particular topic related to health. All these things will provide us with some sort of logical, empirical basis to put our case forward. Okay. Now, let us move ahead with certain challenges. See, while India basically has more than 200 million undernourished people, the COVID-19 pandemic, as I said earlier, has worsened the scenario. And more so, a comprehensive data gathering exercise is yet to take place to judge the impact on the already dismal figures when it comes to nutrition and other human development related aspects. So, a challenge is there not just for policy, economics, health system, right? So, it is a challenge which we will need to encounter on multiple fronts and not just merely from the perspective of statistics or a program. Okay? Food supply chains have disrupted. Just to quote, a lot of students were getting some sort of nutrition via the midday meal scheme. The schools were shut. So were the factories in which the employees and workers were getting one-time meal. They simply could not get that meal. And this would have led to severe deterioration in their nutrient characteristics. The impact is large. If you recall that Niti Aayog came up with a plan for New India at 75. New India at 75, and it made the fulcrum ICDS, Integrated Child Development Services, as the approach to provide the public goods, to provide nutrition, to provide all necessary wherewithal to the children in the first 1000 days of birth. However, the implementation of ICDS is said to be more lackluster than ever. The significance of ICDS as the pivot for the growth or sustainable growth, healthy growth of our children has not achieved the desired results. The focus is lopsided. So, we need to make certain intervention here as well. So, this is a challenge. At the same time, while the schemes and the programs like Poshan, that is of 2018 vintage, could only reduce the stunting among children aged 0 to 3 years. 0 to 3 years by just 1%. By just 1%. While the goal or the larger idea was to reduce it by 3%. So again, we have here achieved only 33.3% of the target which we undertook while launching the Poshan Abhiyan. So something is amiss, whether it is the policy implementation, whether it is the realization of the policy objectives, or the non-favorable global headwinds which have contributed to not so successful results. But it surely gives us a direction that we need to improve on these factors. Okay? At the same time, the World Food Programme reveals that 21.25% of Indian population lives on $1.90 a day. That is almost 180 rupees a day. If I take broader estimates, though it is less than 180 if you will take it by today's exchange rate. So this goes on to show that a substantial chunk, almost 1/5 of the chunk, is living on merely 180 rupees a day. And to say the least, it shows the gravity of the situation when we talk about the disparity in terms of haves and have-nots in the Indian society. The Nutrition Report 2021 also very creatively highlights the environmental impact on nutrition. The environmental impact on nutrition. As we are all aware that environment is all around us and it impacts us just like we impact on the environment. So the environmental degradation has a degrading effect on the human beings and the society at large. the pressure which is exerted on the food system by virtue of environmental degradation impacts the nutritional security of the territory, of the people, of the society, and of the world at large. Okay? This pressure has been measured systematically as part of the nutrition report across the various dimensions of environment degradation. Those dimensions are greenhouse gas emissions, the unsustainable land use, freshwater use, nitrogen application. A lot of crops use nitrogen or sources of nitrogen as food supporters and growth supporters, and phosphorus application. Phosphorus application. So this environment degradation across this spectrum also represent a challenge, because as societies, as countries, as people, we will have to regulate them. Otherwise, the continued abuse across these dimensions will lead to further squeezing of the availability of nutrients and food for the ever-growing population. So, on the one side, the population is growing, and on the other side, the food system is getting constrained and coming under pressure. So, the nutrition report also measures the environmental pressures accorded to all these dimensions. Now, let us look for the solution and way ahead. While the problems give us the cue that we need to make initiatives on policy, economics, as well as the larger societal engagement in terms of providing better nutrition, the provision for adequate and innovative financing is of utmost importance to counter the menace of malnutrition and to provide nutrition to everybody. While policy interventions are the key, no policy can be realized on ground without finance. No policy can be realized on the ground without finance. For a country like India, where there are multiple problems of not just malnutrition, but the skewed distribution of nutrition across the regions, across the communities, we need to make these surgical interventions with a very, very targeted and pinpointed approach. At the same time, while we have legislative mechanisms like National Food Security Act and policy interventions like public distribution system, midday meal system, we need to ensure the last mile delivery, not just the delivery, but the timely and qualitative delivery of these mechanisms to give the desired effect. Then the crop diversification, the crop rotation, the crop patterns need to be changed so that the stress on environment and their utility in terms of providing holistic nutrition remains optimum. So, cropping related interventions. Cropping related interventions. While the nutrition report captures data in a very, very scientific and empirical manner, we need to enhance the quality of data to make timely interventions. So better field surveillance, better data monitoring, better use of that data needs to be incorporated into the overall ecosystem of discourse on nutrition. So use of technology and data. Use of technology and data. So while we have discussed the various facets, the idea of comprehensive nutrition and countering malnutrition in all forms and certain barriers to it, along with certain facts on where we stand as a nation in terms of providing nutrition to our people, especially infants, young ones and expectant mothers or mothers in the expectant age group. It cannot be realized without the active involvement of all the stakeholders. At the same time, this cannot be a sunset project in the sense that we started today and see the results very quickly. It has to be a sustained, determined and persevered effort to change the landscape in terms of the nutrition availability for our people in the long run. And reports like Global Nutrition Report act as a wake-up call for all of us to reflect on what we are doing and what more we should do to counter this menace. So that's all for the special report. Thank you.